I want to know what you meant by train leaders to transformational leaders. Just what that means, and then they can obviously read the book to get all the details. But what's a trained leader compared to a transformational leader?
Well, now you're in the core of my calling, because I have an organization, a nonprofit organization called Equip, and so it's designed to train leaders. And so we, especially in the faith community, made a commitment to. We started off with what we call a 1 million leader mandate. Let's see if we can train 1 million leaders in the world. We accomplished that, and again, as the vision, as you go, the vision expands. And I said, now that we trained 1 million leaders, I wonder if we could train a leader in every country of the world.
Man.
And so we focused on, and in 19 years from starting this organization, in the 19th year, we had trained 5 million leaders in every country of the world. We are the largest leadership training organization in the world.
Wow.
And it was so fulfilling and so satisfied. I mean, and so the board, we got together. I mean, we're obviously having celebrations and parties, and we hit this, and so we're in a board meeting, and it was kind of like, wow, look what we did, look what we did, and all of a sudden there was a restlessness within me, and I said, you know what? I think there's a level higher than what we've done. And they're all looking at us. What do you mean? We trained all these leaders, and we went into I bet about a 3-hour discussion that day with my board, because a lot of them said, boy, let's end it. We just scored. We just won the Super Bowl, and here you're kind of wanting to dive back in. And what I told them was, I said, well, the good news is we've trained leaders. So leaders know what to do, but just because you know how to lead doesn't mean you're changing lives. And I said, I think there's a higher level of leadership than trained leaders, and that's transformed leaders. And so we've got to figure this out. And honestly, even my key people, they looked at me and said, boy, I don't think we understand this transformation. What's transformation? And what I told them was, I can't explain it, but when you see it, you'll know it.
Oh my goodness.
And so we started going in and developing the identity, the characteristics of a transformational leader. And then we started understanding that if people are going to be transformed, it's got to be in small groups like roundtables, not in massive audiences. And we'd trained in auditoriums and massive audiences, and people are taking good notes, and they're learning it. But transformation happens when you and I are talking, and you're encouraging me and challenging me, and I'm asking questions, and we're having that give and take. So we said, let's go see if we can transform countries. And we started with Guatemala. And there's just 3 things to think about. We start top down. We don't even go into country unless the president asks us. Mm-hmm. So we come in by the invitation of the president. We have 22 presidents of countries who have now asked us to come in and do transformation. So I mean, the line's getting long because things are. So top down, because influence filters down. It doesn't filter up. So I mean, we go, with top government, top business, top education, top religion, top media, top arts. We go and we get permission. So it's top down, but then transformation also. It goes small round table to big. Mass movements don't begin with a mass. Mm-hmm. They begin with a few people. Mm-hmm. So it goes, round table, small, big, and then we teach values, because what changes people's lives are values, which is inside out. It's inside out, small, big, top down. And we've got this strategy, Ed, and we've trained 500,000 people in Guatemala now.
Oh my gosh.
And we're going for the tipping point. 10% of a nation we're wanting to be in round tables, because that's the tipping point.
Sure.
Malcolm Gladwell tells us about. And we're in Paraguay now, and we are in Costa Rica, and I just came back from Kenya. I went to Saudi Arabia this year, and by the invitations of the leaders, of the country. And so it's so exciting. And so in leaderships, I talk about transformation, and it's just one chapter, but it was a shift I made, and it was a great shift. And but probably every book I write from now on, I'll have something transformation, because we're seeing such life change, and I'm living and watching this, that it's kind of like it's contagious, and I'm wanting to share it with others, because I think that once a leader understands transformation, they go to a whole new level of their leadership. And now people aren't just following you because you're going to help them be successful. They're following you because their life is being changed.
Oh my gosh.
And that's a whole different game.
And I had him come up onto the stage at a place where I was speaking, and I gave him a few minutes to talk about what he was doing and how he just encouraged, oh my gosh, a crowd of probably 6,000 or 7,000 people, and they were on their feet giving him a standing ovation. And I did that in the memorial service, because I wanted people that didn't know him, they just hear me talk about him, just really get to see him in action. But he was a great, great encourager. One quick story. For a period of time, Margaret and I lived in a condominium, and in the condominium down at the bottom, they had a gym, and so I had a terrific physical trainer named Josephine. I called her Joe. That would meet me on a regular basis and take me through the paces of working out. And when my father came to visit us at the condo, he loved to go down to the gym with me, and because he loved Joe. And so when Dad was there, he'd say, "Are you going to the gym today, son?" "Yeah, I'm going, Dad." "Well, can I go?" "Oh, sure, you can go with me." But I knew that if Dad went with me, that she would begin me in my process of lifting weights and doing all the things I needed to do. And then within 5 minutes, she'd say, "Okay, John, start working your routine," and she'd leave me. Where is she going to go? She's going to go talk to Dad. And for the rest of the time, she'd be talking to Dad. I'd be over there going through the paces. She wasn't even looking at me. Because my father was such an incredible encourager. She loved to literally, quote, sit at his feet. And he would pour good stuff into her, belief into her, positivity into her. And there was more than one time, I'm over there, and I'm chopped liver, to be honest with you. Honest to God, she's listening to Dad, she's with Dad, she's not with me. And my father, one day, I looked over, and he's got his hand on the side of her head, and he's praying with her, and tears are just coming down her cheeks. And she just loved my father. Why? Because he was an encourager. I asked Dad one time, I said, "Dad, how do you know that people need encouragement?" Because he was encouraging everybody. I said, "How do you know they need to be encouraged?" He said, "Son, let me explain this to you. If they're breathing," I love this, "if they're breathing, they need to be encouraged." And that's exactly how my father lived his life. He called encouragement the oxygen of the soul. If you were around my dad, get ready to be encouraged. He didn't know how to have a conversation without saying things that would be positive and uplifting into your life. A great lesson that my father taught me. Another one, terrific lesson, was to work hard. My father was a very hard worker. In fact, he worked full time until 95. And he loved work. So work wasn't work to him. And it just literally came right down through the family. And for my brother, my sister, and myself, we all love to work. And work isn't work. And we find our mission, we find our passion, and it's just, we can hardly wait to do it. So he was an incredible example of working hard. But he also, in that working hard teaching he did, he taught us to work smart. It's not only how hard you work, but it's how smart you work. And one of the things that he did that was just very helpful, I think this helped me the most in the family because I was a fun-loving kid and not highly disciplined. I really wanted to do two things: play ball and be with my friends. And so my father would give me the chore list, and what he would do is he would give it to me at the beginning of the week and say, "John, here are the 5 things you need to do this week." And some of them I had to do every day, like take out the garbage. But then like clean the basement or wash the car. I didn't have to do that every day, but I had to do it that week. And my father would say, "Now, you can choose when you want to do this. If you want to, you can, in fact, if you got the list, you can go down and clean the basement now. You can go out and wash the car now. Or you can do it tomorrow. Or you can do it the next day." He said, you get to choose when you do that work. But he said, "I just want you to know by Saturday at noon it has to be done." And they'd say, Saturday afternoon we're going to maybe go swimming. If you got your chores done, you can go swimming with us. But if your chore isn't done, you got to finish your chores. And I can still remember the day on Saturday afternoon when the rest of the family pulled out in the car, and I was at the front door watching them leave me because I hadn't cleaned the basement. And Dad said, "Well, you didn't prioritize your time, so you clean the basement, we'll go swimming." It was my dad that taught me how to pay now, play later. Huge teaching in my life. In fact, he said, "Let me tell you something. If you pay now, you'll get a play later. But if you just play now, you'll severely pay later." And he talked to me about how doing the right thing compounds into something positive and gives you options at the end. But if you don't do the first things first, you lose your options, and then toward the end of life, the payment really gets compounding and quite severe and difficult. And so my dad just came alongside of me and helped me to understand how to put first things first, how to work hard, how to prioritize my work, and pay now, play later. And it was an incredible lesson for me that just literally, it's just literally revolutionized my life. And to this day, I'm an early riser, and I wake up early, and 5:30. I'm already getting my work done. In fact, my dad used just to say, John, it's just very simple. He said, if you rise early and you work and you prioritize your life well, he said, by the time everybody else is getting up, you're already ahead in the game. In fact, he said, be a person that everybody around you has to play catch up. I love that. In other words, he said, get started first. He was the first person to teach me it's not the fastest person that wins the race, it's the one who starts first. So work hard, work smart, get up early. It was just an incredible, incredible lesson that I packed away in my life and I learned for myself. And it's made a huge difference, no doubt about it. The next lesson is think positive. My father loved Norman Vincent Peale, the power of positive thinking writer, the power of positive thinking speaker, a tremendous motivational speaker in the 1900s, 1960, 2000. And my father loved him, and he loved his books. And you know that my father put books in our hands starting in the 7th grade and paid us to read books. And one of the first books he put in my hand was The Power of Positive Thinking by Norman Vincent Peale. And I'll never forget reading it and marking it and talking it over with my dad. And then one day he had a great surprise. He said, son, we're going to go to Columbus, Ohio next week. And Norman Vincent Peale is going to be speaking at Veterans Memorial Auditorium. And we're going to go hear him speak. And I just read the book and I was all excited. And I not only went with him up to Veterans Memorial Auditorium the next week in Columbus, Ohio, but I had the privilege of meeting Norman Vincent Peale. Have you ever had somebody kind of walk into your life as a friend? And the moment that you met them, everything began to be bigger in your life. What you saw about life, just kind of, the picture just got bigger. If that's the case, then you're going to really like my friend Elmer Towns, who was probably my first official mentor. At the age of 24, began to put me under his wings and mentor me. And the word today I'm in it with Maxwell is big picture. Well, let me give you context so you'll understand what an important influence he really had on my life. I started off my pastorate in a very small community in southern Indiana called Hillham. And when I say small, I mean really small. 11 houses, 2 garages, 1 country store. That's Hillham. That's where I started. In fact, the first Sunday, there were only 3 people in church, and 2 of them were my wife, Margaret, and me, and then some elderly lady who lived beside the church, whose name was Maud. Just Maud, Margaret, and me. That's how I started. Very, very small. But while I was there in that rural, small setting, I had a desire to do something much bigger than what my community was. Didn't know how. And then one day I picked up a book by Elmer Towns on America's fastest growing churches. And I read that book, and then he wrote another book on the 10 largest churches in America. And all of a sudden he began to expand my mind. I'll never forget, I found out that he was going to speak in Waterloo, Iowa at a conference. And so I booked a plane and went out to Waterloo, Iowa, and I was so nervous during a break as I went up to shake his hand and tell him that his books influenced my life and that he was really helping me. And I'll never forget, he just kind of loved me. And in fact, he said, tomorrow morning I'm leaving for Chicago. would you like to go with me? And I said, of course I'd like. I didn't live in Chicago, but if that's where he was going, I wanted to go. And we sat together on that plane, and he began to pour into me. We went then to the United Club Lounge afterwards for maybe another hour before we parted ways. And he marked my life that day because he gave me a picture of people that were doing bigger and better things than I had ever in my own mind imagined. He stretched me. He took me completely out of everything I knew and out of my comfort zone and said, John, there's a big world out there. Go take it. Go for it. And I did. Elmer Towns, who I affectionately call E.T., literally has always stretched me. He's always caused me to take the next step and to go just a little bit higher. I'm so in love and indebted to him for who he is and what he means to me. Recently, I was at a conference in Birmingham, Alabama, and there he was attending the conference, 88 years old now, sitting on the second row, just taking notes, and during breaks coming up and saying, John, wasn't this great? And look what I learned in that last session. And I looked at Elmer and I thought, oh my, he still sees a picture bigger than himself. He sees it for himself. He sees it for others. He saw it for me. That's why I have Minute with Maxwell with you. I see a big picture for you, perhaps bigger than what you see for yourself. That's why I love coming every day into your life and doing my best to do what E.T. has done for me. Just let you see a big picture, a bigger one than perhaps you've seen before. And remember this, you'll fill that picture because you'll grow to what you see.
Let's talk about motivation. The ability to motivate yourself. The best motivation is self-motivation. I mean, we've got to get beyond someone else or something else being the motivator of our life. We've got to get beyond that. See, here's the difference between leaders and followers. Leaders motivate themselves, and followers wait for others to motivate them. That's one of the huge differences between leaders and followers. Leaders are self-motivated, followers are other-motivated. If you wait for someone else to motivate you, you're going to always be waiting. If you wait for the mood to strike you, you'll always be waiting. If you wait for the right person at the right time, at the right place, for the right reason and purpose to come to you before you seize an opportunity, you'll always be waiting. Recently, I did a conference, a large conference. It was in Atlanta for about 700 people in a network marketing organization. And there was a guy named Jim who came up to me at the break, and I could tell he was very high up in this company. What's interesting is I said, Jim, how long have you really risen? And I mean, how long have you been up where you are? He said, I just have gotten here. He said, after 5 years of being in this business, he said, I only had 7 people in my organization. Now, that's just, I mean, I didn't know a lot about his business, but it didn't sound too good to me. You know what I'm saying? I mean, the boy's been at it 5 years. He's got 7. That's just a little bit over 1 a year. So he wasn't really excelling. But then he said, in the last 2 years, he said, I've got 1,000 people in this business under me. And he began to talk about what they were doing, and I could tell that he was becoming highly successful in the process. And I said, well, what was the difference, Jim? And he said, well, the difference is, he said, I had a paradigm shift in my thinking. And then he said a statement that I put in your notes. He said, I decided to promote motivated people instead of motivating promoted people. He said, the day that I realized that there was a certain individual that I needed to go after, the self-motivated individual, he said, all of a sudden, it changed everything about my business. That's why I love this quote in here. It says, I believe you don't motivate people. What you do is hire motivated people, then make sure that you don't demotivate them. And here's another great quote by Patrick. He said, it is the greatest folly to talk of motivating anybody. The real key is to help others to unlock and direct their deepest motivators. Unmotivated people give required effort
where motivated people give inspired effort. And there's a lot of difference between the person that says, what do I have to do? What's required of me? And the person who gives the inspired effort. So I want to give you 4 P's that inspire effort in people. What I'm saying to you this afternoon is our goal isn't so much to motivate people, it's to unlock what is already the motivators in their life and to free them out. The first P in inspiring effort in others stands for perspective. The first P stands for perspective. In other words, we have to ask ourselves this question: how do others see things? A question I often ask an audience when I'm giving a talk on leadership is, how many of you here believe that the job of a leader is to motivate others? Nearly everyone raises their hand. However, as I make it explicit to them, a leader cannot motivate anyone. It is actually rather foolish to think that any of us can put motivation into anyone else. You see, all the motivation is already inside everyone we meet. The real challenge of a leader is to tap and channel that motivation. And to tap and channel motivation, a leader must see and feel through the other person's eyes and emotions. Now, this is so key. I hope I can do a good job explaining this. In the States, we have the kind of the traditional adage that about leading a horse to water. Your goal isn't to lead a horse to water. Your goal is to make the horse thirsty. If the horse gets thirsty, the horse will find water on its own. See, what we always try to do is we look at something tangible in motivating people and miss what really is needed to help them. And the task of a leader is to discover in people what makes them thirsty. Now, I just stop here for a moment, and I would just challenge you to ask yourself the question, do you know what makes the people that are in your business thirsty? Do you know what it is? Because I want to tell you something. I can promise you this. This is a perspective issue. I can promise you it's different. In fact, people that are not successful in drawing out the motivational desires of others are not successful because they operate from a base of what motivates them, not what motivates the other person. That's why whenever I run into a leader that doesn't ask good questions, I know that that person is not a good leader. Good leaders ask great questions. Good leaders have the ability to sit down over a lunch and ask questions of which lead them to discovering what's inside that other individual. That's why many times when I do leadership conferences, I teach leaders that whenever I can sit down with anybody over an hour lunch or dinner, and I basically can find out what makes them thirsty. Because all I have to do is ask them basically 3 questions. One question is what do you cry about? I want to find out what hurts them. If you really can have a transparent moment with a person and say, okay, what do you cry about? I promise you, you're going to, someone will say, oh, I'm going to tell you what, my kids aren't doing really good. Hey, the marriage, they'll begin to talk to you about the things that cause them the greatest grief. Then the second question I always ask them is, what do you sing about? In other words, what do you do that when you do it, you're so happy doing it, you want to do it again? What is it that brings great joy to you? What is it that brings great happiness to you? Because what I found is, whatever that is, people keep doing it. Sometimes even sadly to their own detriment when it isn't a high priority in their life. So what do you sing about? What do you cry about? And thirdly, what do you dream about? If you could ever be what you ever wanted to be, and if you could do whatever you wanted to do, what would you be? What would you do? Great question. Now, all I'm saying is, leaders understand that it's absolutely key in bringing out the motivational desires of people to have the perspective of the other person. Leaders always think through the other person. They are always asking the question, where are they? How do they feel? What are they thinking? What do they need? That's leaders are other person oriented in their thinking. Followers are never other person oriented in thinking. They are self-oriented in thinking. They're saying, I hope everything goes okay. I hope I hope that I hope people like me. I hope I can be successful in my speech. For example, when a leader gets up to speak, the leader is thinking, how can I find out where the people are and move them farther down the field? A follower, if they got up to speak, they'd say, man, I just hope I don't embarrass myself. Total different type of approach to even thinking. Okay, that deals with the other having a perspective of another person. The second P is perceptive. Now I'm going to get even a little bit deeper here and ask the question: are they still motivated by the same things? Now, in other words, what we have to understand is that the process of time, people's motivations change. It is never-ending task to be an effective leader because time changes all things. Therefore, you must discipline yourself to keep up with the change. What is effective in motivating people at one point in their careers will not be effective in motivating them later. People's values, they change, depending on what is happening to their personal lives as well as their success in their careers. Therefore, one of the most important things that a leader must do is continue to study how to be effective. And this takes discipline. It is much easier to assume that what worked yesterday will work today, and this simply is not true. People change. This is not the only reason, but one of the reasons people like you in your business will drop out is because sometimes their motivation changes. And you have to always be aware of how people's motives and motivation changes. As a leader, you have to realize your people are going through those. The third P is persistence. To be highly successful, you have to have persistence. Three great quotes in your notes. It is the last step in a race that counts. It is the last stroke of the nail that counts. Many a prize has been lost just when it was ready to be plucked. Boy, isn't that true? That's just so true. In other words, all I'm saying in success is keep on keeping on. How many times we come so close to success, but we just drop out and quit and stop just before we were ready to reap the reward. I think the biggest loser of all is not the person who's done nothing. I think it's the person who's done something, dropped out before they got the reward of what they could have had if they'd have kept on keeping on. The last P is persuasion. The word persuasion in the Latin, the word per means through. The word suasio means sweetness. So basically what persuasion is through sweetness, you're persuading people. Through relationships. That's what it means to persuade.
It is only as we develop others that we permanently succeed. Firestone said that. Here's what Maxwell says. It's only as we develop ourselves that we have the credibility to develop others. So all of development and equipping of others begins with me. Now, if you want to become a great equipper, make equipping your number one responsibility. You have to make it your number one responsibility. Look at the quote. It's always easier to dismiss people than it is to train them. No great leader ever built a reputation on firing people. Many have built a reputation on developing them. Get on the positive side. Why make equipping others your number one responsibility? 2 reasons. Letter A, it's the only way to grow big. The reason you want to make equipping your number one responsibility is the only way you'll ever grow your business bigger than yourself is by including others than yourself. And number 2, it's the only way to keep growing. It's the only way to grow big, and it's the only way to keep growing. Now, let me teach you from my mistakes. When I went to my first church in 1969, fresh out of college, graduated second in my class, didn't have a clue. All my professors thought I was pretty good, but they didn't teach me anything practical. And one thing I didn't know how to do when I went to my first church is I didn't know how to equip people. So therefore, I did everything myself. Nobody ever trained me, nobody ever taught me, never saw it modeled. So here I am, a kid right out of college, working hard, trying to grow this church. Now, here are the results. And I wrote these down. Don't write them down, just think about it. When I look at my first church, watch this. It grew when I touched it. It complained when I didn't. and it fell apart when I left. So when I went to my second church, I said to myself, I'll never let that happen again. I may build it a little slower. It may take a little more time, but I'm going to put my number one priority of equipping people. And when I went to Lancaster, I started looking for the good ones. I started looking for my eagles. I started pulling them apart. I want to tell you what happened in Lancaster. I, over a period of 5 years, equipped 35 people. Now you said, boy, you're awfully slow, John. Those 35 people literally brought, not me, those 35 people brought another 1,000 people into the organization that I never touched. They never knew me. They would show up to church, and I would never say, whoa, they showed up because I went to see them. They showed up because somebody else was doing it. And I learned a long time ago that it's better to start equipping people and pouring your time into the people that will make the organization than going around trying to make everybody happy, trying to touch everybody, and watching it fall. Hey, you go on vacation, the group goes down. Come on now. That's not what you want. That isn't what you're living for. That isn't what you're trying to build for the future in your business. You're wanting to pour your life through people until when you're gone, that business can continue to grow in your life. So some questions to ask yourself, very simple. They're in your notes. How much time do I spend weekly equipping others? Whoa. I mean, hey, in your week, how many hours? How many people do I equip? How many people are they equipping? These are good questions to ask. So, number one, make equipping your number one responsibility. Are you ready for number two? Communicate this priority to your people. After you have made equipping number one priority, you begin to communicate it. Now, by the way, let me tell you something. The greatest way to communicate it to them is letting them watch you do it. People do what people see. It's the number one motivational principle in all the world. See, people tend to stay motivated when they see the importance of the things that they are asked to do. You never know what kind of a giant you have built until you leave it alone. Are you all right? If you've got to go over there and weed that garden and keep putting water on that garden and fertilizer on that garden, and you got to keep working that baby, after a while you'll understand that you don't have what you want. Now, here's what you communicate when you communicate the priority of equipping people. Here's what you communicate. I'm going to spend a lot of time with a few people. Who are they? Committed people. What will we do? Equip. I'm going to give a lot of recognition to a few people. Who are they? Committed people. What will they do? Equip. You start communicating those messages to your groups, and you'll begin to change the whole nature of your group. Number three, principle number three in equipping, develop a relationship with those that you do equip. What I mean is very simple. Find the heart before you ask for their hand. You probably read the book Iacocca, did you? It's a good book. In the book Iacocca, he talks about an interview that he did with Vince Lombardi, the great coach, the legendary coach for the Green Bay Packers. If you'll just listen, let me just read a paragraph. He asked Lombardi what it took to develop a winning team, and here's what Lombardi said. There are a lot of coaches with good ball clubs who know the fundamentals and have plenty of discipline, but they still don't win the game. Then you come to a third ingredient. If you're going to play together as a team, you've got to care for one another. You've got to love each other. Each player has to be thinking about the next guy and saying to himself, if I don't block that man, Paul is going to get his legs broken. I've got to do my job well in order that he can do his. He said the difference between mediocrity and greatness, this is what Lombardi said, is the feeling that these guys have for one another. That feeling that the guys have for one another is based on a relationship. It's based on bonding yourself to them. Now, here's what I'm saying. The people that you equip are the ones you have to bond yourself to. And how do you bond to that people? Connectedness. You build and you bond through connectedness. You've got to go home and you've got to develop a relationship with the people that you equip, and you do it through connectedness. Number four, The fourth way to equip people is to develop a strategy for equipping people. I'm going to give you a strategy. Don Shula has a wonderful strategy for equipping players, the coach of the Miami Dolphins. He says, 1, tell people what you want them to do. 2, show them what good performance looks like. That's very good. 3, let them do it. 4, observe their performance. 5, praise progress or redirect it. Here's Maxwell's strategy for equipping people. Starts with the M's. Modeling. Starts with modeling. I model. In other words, I do it. In other words, they watch me do it so they know how to do it. Number 2 is mentoring. I do it and you are with me. Number 3 is monitoring. You do it and I'm with you. Number 4 is motivating. You do it. Simple enough? And 5 is multiplying. You do it and someone is with you.
Hey, podcast listeners! How would you like to be equipped with the tools to continue your personal growth and refine your strengths and weaknesses, all while being surrounded by other growth-minded leaders like yourself? You may have heard of our International Maxwell Conference, or IMC. It's our biannual event in which Maxwell Leadership certified team members come from all around the world to grow and learn together. IMC this August is the first time we're opening the event to the public by kicking the event off with our first ever Personal Growth Day. This is a 1.5-day event on August 29th through the 30th in Orlando, Florida. And it's designed to dig deeper into who you are and how you tick so that you can become the best version of yourself. If you are unable to attend Personal Growth Day in person, we also offer virtual access to the event. If you would like to participate in a one-of-a-kind experience and stand shoulder to shoulder with growing leaders who will sharpen your skills and equip you to create powerful, positive impacts in your life, go to maxwellleadership.com/Personal Growth Day to learn more or get your ticket. We will see you there.
Welcome back. For those of you viewing, welcome to the studio. It's good to be in the studio with you, Chris. I'm so glad you're here, buddy.
Yeah.
For those of you listening in, join us sometime and notice that Chris has a voice for radio
That's right.
and a face for YouTube. I'll tell you that. Hey, while John was talking, I thought about a Chris Hogan quote that I've heard. Great leaders focus on equipping their teams. It is unfair to expect what you did not equip.
Yeah.
And it brings me to what we really want to deliver to you today, and that is equipping others is the only way to grow big and to become bigger. And Chris, that's exactly we talk about here at Maxwell Leadership. We talk about we want to be bigger, better, brighter. Our best days are not behind us.
Yeah.
We're leaning in. We're stretching toward the next level of impact. We've got the next summit of accomplishment in our view. And I think John's telling us today, you and I, to get there, better start figuring out how to equip people.
Yeah, it's a multiplication of what you desire to do as a leader, right? And John has taught us this along the way where we don't want to develop followers. It's back to why we do what we do, right? We want to develop leaders. So we want to add value. I love what you talked about with Bob early as we introduced this episode. What I love about that is Bob's in his mid-70s and still learning.
I love it.
And still growing so that he can develop other leaders. And so I love that. While he was talking, I was thinking about his book, The Leader's Greatest Return. I was with an organization last week, and I brought that book up because everybody's like, man, when you think about business and you think about leadership, and you're like, what is the return on investment? And what John gets to at the heart of this lesson in that book is it's about developing and equipping people. Now, before we dive in and I pull some stuff just from what you're experiencing as a leader, I want to share with our audience, those that are watching and those that are listening, some statistics that I think will just kind of wake us up to the importance of the topic today. Gallup says that out of 10 people that are promoted, okay, 1 out of those 10, they have high talent to be able to lead other people, okay? 2 out of those 10 have functioning talent. The other 8, it needs to be developed in them.
Wow.
And so when you look at that and you think about your team and your people and those that are on your team, 8 out of 10 need you or your leaders to be equipping them. The other thing it said that I think is just important is they said only 40% of people feel like they have a chance to learn and grow at work, and only 33% feel someone at work encourages their development. Now, John talks about the law of the lid, and I think in organization and in teams, our lid is this topic right here, is equipping. Talk a little bit about, like, when you are challenged with that opportunity to lead an individual that is maybe opposite than you or some of your other team members, can be difficult in the way they think and the way they lead, the pace at which they play. Where do you go with that? How do you approach that in a one-on-one leadership setting?
Chris, I'm going to take a couple of minutes here, if you don't mind, to respond, because something you said really made me reflect on something I've learned in the last couple of weeks with my wife, Stephanie. And don't send her the link.
That's right.
Just keep it here. Keep it right here. Yeah. But first, let me say this in specific to your question on how I have done this over the years. I'm a relational leader. So one of the things that John really has worked with me on, and I've shared it with our podcast listeners for a long time, was, I want to please people, and at times in my life, I've wanted to please them more than lead them. And if you haven't heard that, go back to all of our podcast listeners, because I've referred to it a lot. Yeah. But in that, really, I just wanted to win with people. I didn't want to win the day. I didn't want to win the argument. I didn't want to win necessarily my way and my will. Now, come back to something I learned about myself with Stephanie. I'm going to go back to that in just a moment. But I really wanted to win the day with people so that I would have an ability to influence them tomorrow. So a lot of my working with difficult people that you just complimented me on comes very natural in my desire, my relational bent toward connecting with people to have another day of opportunity with them. So difficult, not difficult. I want to win the day with them because tomorrow we've got another opportunity. Yeah. And I just think like that. Yeah. Well, what happens is sometimes I miss the moment of really helping a leader that can come to a better revelation of themselves in the difficult moment because I'm too busy trying to patch it to get to tomorrow. And so as complimentary as you have been through the years, and this is not the first time I've heard you say, I'm one of the best at difficult one-on-one conversations. I don't give myself that same report card. John's been very complimentary to me on that. But what I will tell you I've learned since John taught me, do you want to lead or love more? Which one? Figure it out, because there's going to be days you're going to have to figure out, do you want to be a leader or do you want to be loved? When I began to apply that into dealing with difficult leaders, I began to do some of the things that John talks about in our lesson. Yeah. Know their personality, know their temperament, know their heart, know their relational bent, know their dreams. And I began to pay attention to that, and then I would walk into a meeting trying to move them toward their desired outcomes, toward their bent, and then began to take the opportunity to even have the difficult conversation right there on the spot, rather than prepping them. Okay, now let's have the difficult conversation. It caused me to be faster as a relational leader. So one example that I can think of is a very strong leader, very difficult leader, a leader that, to be honest with you, many years ago was not necessarily liked by everybody in the organization, a pretty difficult leader. Well, I had an infrastructure, a silo organization that would allow them to lead pretty much insulated. So every once in a while they'd come and ruffle a few feathers, but pretty much insulated. But what I understood is that leader respected strong leadership. John never had a problem with that leader. Other people may not have had a problem with that leader. But when I would come in with my relational, how you doing, what's going on, let's hug it out, I would leave and no change was happening because that leader respected strong leadership. Yeah. And I'll never forget a very particularly difficult time in our leadership relationship to where I dropped 3 or 4 things that I was doing at the time, very important things. And I came back and I laid it on the line and I said, let me tell you this, you keep going that direction and this is the last day you'll go that direction, so figure out another direction, because we're not doing that. And I'll never forget when that leader that typically, I didn't have many conversations like that with that leader looked at me and went, this is the best meeting we've ever had. Let's go this way over here. Yeah. And if you're watching by YouTube, which all of you should, I'm pointing the other direction, because because this leader really appreciated strong leadership. And I'll never forget the moment, Chris, to where I realized that I actually had gained respect and relational equity by doing something that if I'd have done to 90% of my other leaders, they would have lost it, felt like I was dishonoring them, demeaning them, devaluing them, and it's because that leader needed that. We, to illustrate, underline the point, every leader needs to be understood
That's right.
by their leader on how to be effective with them.
That's right.
Now so I told you I was going to be a little candid here. I'm working on this. So everybody in podcast land, when you come up and say thank you and you're listening to the podcast, Mark, thank you. Here's almost, Chris, what I hear all the time. Thank you for your authenticity. What they're really saying is thank you for opening up the closet and letting all your junk fall out. And this is going to be one of those moments, and I'm not sure where to go on this, except I'm going to take one step in front of the other. I asked my wife, Stephanie, a couple of weeks ago, I said, do you think I love conflict? And it was that quiet right here. And I would ask you that right here on the podcast, but I don't, because I think most people in our organization think that I like conflict. I'm a contrarian. I like to come at it. And she said, no, I don't think you like it. And she said, I think you hate it. And of course, she was applying it to our relationship. And when we get into moments of conversation, speaking of leading difficult people, she's trying to lead me, a difficult person. And she said, no, I don't think you do. She said, I think you like control, not conflict. Now, dude, that rocked me, because I think the reason I come hard and conflict with people sometimes, because I do love a good argument, but I love to win. And if I don't win, and if it prolongs and we don't reach a conclusion, I don't like that, because I want the situation to be controlled when I'm done with the argument. And I'm working through that, Chris, but the reason I felt like that was important, as I reflected in your opening comments right there, is leaders need to understand what it is that drives one another.
Yeah.
And I thought conflict, iron sharpens iron. I have a consulting firm, the Iron League, and iron sharpening iron, it was like that conflict statement with me. But I really think that conflict is a tool to control, not control a tool to conflict. Because some people conflict with one another and they do that with a spirit of control. I don't. I use conflict to get into control of a situation. And I'm not sure if that's bad or good. I'm just helping you know how to lead a difficult person right here as you try to co-lead with me and help me run this organization.
What do they call that? That's a mic drop right there. Matter of fact, can we have Stephanie and you can step offside? I'd like to talk to Stephanie.
As long as Sarah can come in.
Yeah, no. That is brilliant.
Yeah.
That is brilliant, and I think that's spot on. Knowing you for so many years, and you often say, "Don't mistake my intensity, right, for my passion." Well, your passion is driven by what you want to do. Your purpose behind things, which is you want to control the situation. And so, I think that's awesome that you were able to kind of share that. Now, I want to take that example and the one you gave previously with another team member, and talk a little bit about this, because I think what you're saying to everybody is that we need to lead people the way they need to be led.
Right.
And so many of us just lead people how either has been modeled for us in the past or how we like to be led. You and I, highly relational. So what do? We go straight down the relational in order to get an outcome. And we just need to begin to understand our people, which I love where John's talking about this in that first point where he says, you got to know your people. John developed this methodology, the 5 levels of leadership. Mm-hmm. The foundation to successful influence with people is level 2, where he talks about you have to connect with people. And the great thing about that is adversity connects, obviously understanding how they're wired connects, and then you go through their personalities, their temperament, everything he's laid out for you. You have to know that about your people in order to have conversations. You knew in that example, prior to the one with Stephanie, you could come in and say, you could drop the bottom line. You knew you could do that, and you would gain credibility for that individual. And I think what your underlying statement here is that you've got to truly know people. And John has given us incredible tools here, comments of beginning to understand people. Now, I want to shift you a little bit on this, because I think from a personal example, you're spot on, and you're really good at it in a one-on-one situation. I've also seen you do it in a team dynamic. And some of us are leading teams, leading organizations where we have difficulty in different departments, different verticals. And I've seen John teach you this and model it to where he'll bring somebody onto the team in one way or another, and they're a difficult personality. And he's like, but just trust me, they need to be here, but just trust me. If there's a values and a DNA match, John is totally open for that difficult personality. And so you have been riding shotgun, and I'm now seeing you do that with bringing people onto our team, with leading different team members. Talk about the dynamics and how that affects the culture and how you go about that with difficult team members.
Well, and you are co-leading. You know what's interesting, podcast land, you may not know this, but when I joined John 22 years ago, Chris Godey was actually already on the team, and he was leading about a third of the company at that time in event operations and fulfillment. And so you've led for a long time the Maxwell way.
Yeah.
But you're seeing a little bit different side of me now. And when we were listening to John, I began to reflect, and this is why I came out of his talk and just said, mic drop. I mean, that's so good, is because we've grown about 35 to 40% in staff members in the last 2 years.
Very quickly.
Yes, grasp your breath, because I do every single day, or every single pay period, I grasp my breath. Here's what I'm discovering, Chris. The bigger your organization, the more people you lead, and we've got some people leading 400 or 500 people plus that's listening to this podcast. The bigger the organization, the more tempted you are as a leader to allow the systems that you have created to become more important than the difficulty of the leaders on your team. That's a problem, guys. It's a problem. And I'm leading like that, Chris. I told you a little bit about this right before we went live today, is I'm realizing that I have opportunities and obstacles in our organization right now. And I'm expecting those opportunities or those obstacles to be dealt with a teammate in a system that we have created. And yet that system, that division or that solutions group may not be gifted with the greatest strengths to attack that opportunity or to solve that difficulty. And I realized during this lesson, listening to John, that you can become so caught up in your strategic plan or your organizational systems that you try to minimize the difficulty, the personality, the challenges of people on your team rather than expanding their ability to help the entire organization. And it struck me, Chris, as we were listening to this today, that you and I have a responsibility. If we apply this lesson, and you help me with business development stuff, you're helping me with the trajectory of our organization, it occurred to me, I'm going to quit telling and I'm going to start showing you and I, and the rest of y'all can listen in or watch in. It occurred to me that you and I can never allow systems to try to paralyze very gifted people and minimize their difficulty. Their difficulty is on your team, as John laid all of his board members out. Their difficulty, their challenging aspects are on your team for the organization at large, not for the solution group or the little team that they lead.
That's good.
And I'm not exploiting the difficulty. And I said exploiting the difficulty of attribute that some of our leaders have, and I'm not allowing them to soar because it's not in their system. And I guarantee you, if I will get a return on this particular podcast, you and I are going to see that done differently in the coming days and weeks, because I am an organizational leader that started leading more from our systems that we've set up than engaging the people that are on our team despite their difficulties.
What I'm hearing you talk about, and I agree with you, and is that it's okay to allow leaders to have cross-functional impact, even though if they're difficult, across the organization, across your team, whatever that might look like. And it's interesting when John talks about developing a game plan, he mentioned in there exactly what you're talking about, where he said, hey, make sure you delegate or empower according to their strengths. That's not just for their vertical. their solutions group. It's for the good of the enterprise or the good of your team or the organization that you're leading. Is that easy? No, but as a leader, it's your job to be able to first, as we talked about just a minute ago, connect with them on a one-on-one level, as Mark gave you some great examples, and then secondly, be able to do that on their behalf for the team. And so I think that's absolutely gold.
By the way, I put this all in the learner guide, so there's going to be 7 of these, and there's some details. So go ahead and get the learner guide; it'll help you with that. But signal 1. Failure to exercise good judgment. Dr. Folkman says that are others confident in your ability to make good decisions? In that inaccurate judgments that we think that, well, I'm the boss, I'm the person in charge, I make all the decisions.
Yeah.
And do people actually have confidence in your ability to make those decisions?
Yeah. One of the things that Folkman says in his book is that too often leaders assume that their positional leadership qualifies them to make critical decisions where they may not have the best data and insight. And this goes back to how we teach influence and leadership at level 1, where because it just says it right there, they have that position, they're making some crazy judgments, crazy decisions, and your team's sitting back going, he or she has no idea what's going on. That completely is not the right decision. And so your team loses confidence in you. And you're basing that off of the fact that because you have the title, because you have the position, you're qualified to make that decision. And that's not necessarily the best judgment. What I love about a collaborative leadership style, ultimately, listen, when you're leading, you're responsible. It's your decision to make the final decision. Mm-hmm. But man, you want to up your level of trust with your team is to involve them in that conversation. What are you seeing that I don't see? What's your perspective? How can I make a decision here? Listen, leaders, you don't have to have all the answers, right? You don't have to make all the decisions without people being able to speak into that. Now, there's a cap on that. You don't need to get too many things in your head, but you definitely need to improve the way that you're making decisions and your judgment. And by doing that, you will increase the trust that your team has in you and your judgment.
Yeah, I love that. Inviting a shared voice, inviting others to speak into it. We talk a lot about vulnerability, and vulnerability builds trust. When you show the 3 most unused words in leadership, I don't know, to say, what do you think? And inviting that for decision. Okay, signal number 2, Dr. Folkman says, hypocritical behavior. He says, are you a role model, or could actions sometimes be interpreted as hypocritical? Do you set standards and then ignore them? Do you, it's better for thee but not for me, that type of a thing? What's your view on that one?
So what we're talking about here is really behavior. We talk so much about behavioral change, and we're in the behavioral change business, and we want to have our behavioral change at times. We want to always be growing, always be learning. And one of the things that bothers me, and I see it in leaders around the world, I'll give you just a very simple example. This is corny, but you say, hey, I'm a servant leader, and then you pull into the organization and the front parking spot says Perry Holly, right? Versus whatever it might be. And I think there's no doubt that leadership is contagious. And we talk about that people are watching you all the time, and you need to be aware of that, because when that is happening, people are watching you, and then if that does not align with your audio, people are going to be like, well, listen, Chris is over here doing this, but he says this, so it must be okay to do that. Right. And a lot of us we learn visually, and as leaders, we need to be aware of that to make sure, because people are going to be watching us, and if we're not aligning what we're doing physically with what we're talking about audibly, then we're not going to have any credibility. We're not going to have any trust. They're not going to trust us.
My son owns a Chick-fil-A restaurant, and I asked him, what's your biggest leader lesson so far? He's doing at it. And he said, how much easier it is to ask someone to clean the restrooms when they've seen you clean the restrooms. Yeah. And he said it's be hypocritical for him to say how important the restroom clean is and how we got to clean on top of this. And by the way, you go do it. I don't do it. Yeah. He said when he got in there, when they see him in there doing it, that they all realize that's not hypocritical behavior. Yeah. That's really
one other comment too. That this is a little bit of a pet peeve of mine. Is there are things as leaders of teams and of people that you will have never done before. but you're going to go ask somebody to do it. And that's okay. There are going to be situations like that. What bothers me about it is they go, well, it's not very hard. It shouldn't take you but about 10 minutes. Go. And so although there are times that I'm not going to have experience in something that I'm asking a team member to do, the way that I talk about it, the way that I approach it needs to be so. Now, if there's a chance for me to roll up my sleeves and get in there, man, it's the first thing I want to do. Like great example with your son. But if there's not, what I want to encourage you so that you don't break their trust is don't make assumptions as you're communicating, asking them to do something that you have no idea how long it's going to take or how hard it is to do.
Hey, podcast listeners. Do you have a clear plan for growth? Achieving big results most often does not require big life changes. Small improvements over time compound into big results. Download the Maxwell Leadership app. It's the new free app where our expert guides and John Maxwell help you pace your leadership journey and set a clear plan for your own personal growth. You can also find all sorts of resources on the Maxwell Leadership app, including this podcast, information on upcoming events, and much more. Just search Maxwell Leadership in your app store and download the app today.
Signal number 3 from Trifecta of Trust, Dr. Folkman says, inability to show consistency and honor commitments. Do you say one thing and do another? Do you make promises and you don't keep them? But that inconsistency and really how easy it is to say, I'll get that to you, I'll be right, I'm going to look into that, and then you don't. It's like you're not lying, cheating, and stealing. Nope, but you're not keeping those small commitments that I think other people keep track of those things.
Yeah, we talk about being aware of how you make others feel, right? And when it comes to commitments, and Folkman says in his book, it is easy for us to say we can do something, but while we may forget about that commitment or forget about that, those that we make commitments to, even though it may be easy, if we don't follow through, they always remember that because it's how we made them feel by not following through, not having consistency when it comes to that. And it's so important for us as we develop trust to have consistency. The other thing here that I'd love to talk about is I think leaders are missing an attribute of being consistent in order to increase your influence and to increase your trust, because you have to be at a place to where your team, for the most part, knows what they're going to get. Because if they don't, they're coming in with walls up, right? They're coming in, we're like, how's Perry going to react to this request? Or is he going to kind of yell at me through this? Or, I was talking.
Which version shows up?
Yeah, that's right. I was talking to a friend of mine who is in the cybersecurity world, and he just changed organizations, and he changed from a big firm to a smaller boutique firm, but it's still a decent sized firm. And I said, how's it going? First couple of weeks. And he said, man, you know what's amazing is that what is happening with my leader on team meetings and product rollouts is so consistent across the 2 weeks that I've been there to what they told me in the interview process, where people are not screaming at each other, the leader's not yelling. I see this consistency of this behavior, and it's so refreshing to me. And I was like, man, that's awesome, right? Like that's something that I think as leaders we need to be thinking about. And so not only consistent with emotions, but then your follow through. To his point, like, people will not forget your commitments that you have not followed through with them. And so make sure that you're being very intentional about that.
Signal number 4, as a reminder, these are 7 signals that might break trust. You might not be trusted as much as you think you are. Number 4 from the book Trifecta of Trust is neglecting relationship building practices. Do you make an effort to stay in touch with the issues or concerns of other people? Are you the last to know when other people are having problems? I often write about this. There are people telling you bad news. Do they feel safe coming to you? Do you have that relationship? Do you know people on a personal level, that sort of thing?
Yeah, when it comes to relationship, for us, I immediately go to, level 2 influence in the 5 levels of leadership, which is the foundation of everything that we teach with our clients and with our partners on helping them develop leaders and shift culture inside their organization, is to understand that common language. Level 2 influence is the foundation. John calls it relationships as well. And if you don't get this right, if you skip over that, what we see in a lot of organizations is we see a high turnover number. We see a lot of lack of engagement because people come in with a title, they go right to production, and they never build relationships or connect with their people. And I think this is the foundation. Now, I also want to make sure you can understand, you can interchange the word relationships with connect, right? A lot of people go, I don't want to build a relationship with Perry because they think it's this warm and fuzzy. But there are ways for you to connect with your team members in a way that allows you to build trust with them, and you're not neglecting them. And so there are all kinds of creative ways. Projects connect, adversity connects, data connects, whatever it might be. There are ways for you to be able to connect, and a lot of people neglect that, and in turn, there's a lack of trust, then there's a lack of engagement. It just kind of rolls on down the hill.
Well, I think about it too, that we talk about you may climb the levels of leadership on the 5 levels, but you never leave the previous level behind.
That's good.
I think I've seen many leaders that go, whoop, so glad that relationship building's
I'm
over
out.
so we can get down to business.
Yeah.
You're thinking, no, that's what's happening here. The trust begins to fall away when you don't know me personally.
Yeah.
Signal number 5, lack of technical professional expertise. Expertise about your profession. Are you competent in the role, or are you out of date with certain aspects of your job? Are you keeping up to be an expert in the space that you're leading in?
This is reminds me of a comment that John says, and he'll say some really funny phrases sometimes. And matter of fact, I've even heard him say where sometimes he'll create words just because he wants them to be in the dictionary, even though they're not words, and then they end up in the dictionary. But he says this about, especially with technology, but also even just leading people in the world we're in right now, faster than it's ever been. And because of that, as leaders, we need to make sure that we are always growing and that we are always learning and that we are bringing trends, we're bringing thoughts, we're bringing ideas to the team that we are learning as leaders, because then that's going to build trust in the team. Versus if we don't, to your point, we have a lack of that, and things are changing at such a fast pace, then your teams, they're not going to buy into that. They're not going to do that. Again, I'll go back to the statement of leadership is contagious. And so when they see you doing that and you don't have a lack of it, then you're going to find them going, hey, I was reading this article the other day and I thought about you here. Right. And all of a sudden you create this environment and this culture of learning with a kind of a growth mindset.
Back of that teachableness we talk about.
Yeah.
Signal number 6, are you avoiding collaboration and cooperation? Are there groups or individuals in your space that you're uncooperative with? Or do you have unresolved conflict with other people in the organization? So you're viewed as being maybe disconnected with the other parts of the organization.
Yeah, I think when it comes to this, you want to definitely be collaborative. We talked about that a little bit earlier and get cooperation. What I want to encourage you is that doesn't mean that this is not going to come without any tension or without any conflict. That is going to happen, but you got to handle it the right way, right? You got to be able to say, no, I'm going in this, and I want us to collaborate. I want to hear your voice. They want to feel heard. I want to know what your perspective is on those things because, again, then you're connecting with them. And I want to encourage you not only to be doing this within your team, but I would also encourage you to be doing this with cross-functional teams to begin to kind of spread your influence and your thoughts to bring other people into this so that you really are getting a collaborative approach. But then make sure, again, you take the time to make sure everybody feels heard. There's going to be tension. There is going to be conflict, but the challenge is not to just let it sit there. Right. And to work through that, make sure we're not avoiding dealing with that. And I'm not saying go out there and stir up conflict. I know some of you listening are like, that's your favorite thing to do. It's not my favorite thing to do, but you got to be careful of how you do that because it's going to happen. Tension's going to happen, and you got to manage that, and you got to lead them through that. And when your team sees you doing that, they're definitely going to increase their trust in you.
Signal number 7, absence of communication. Do you keep your team well informed? Do people know what's going on? Are you talking about progress and changes and new directions? Are people being surprised on your team, or do you keep them well informed?
Well, as we wrap up, this is something that's personal for me because I always feel like I can do a better job of it. And what's interesting is that some people on your team want to know everything. Now, they maybe it's not the right time for them to know everything. As a leader, you're going to know some things before your team and all that kind of stuff. Other people, they don't really just care. It's like, hey, what's my job? We're good. And you got to understand how to lead all of them, right? And communicate to all of them and communicate the proper way. There's different forms of how people like to receive information. But when they are surprised, there's a problem. As a leader, when they're surprised, they will not necessarily trust you. And one of the examples I think about is, again, I'll use an example Mark Cole has taught me, which is when you're getting ready to go in and have a tough conversation or communicate with an individual, if they're surprised by what you're about to tell them or the hard conversation you're going to have, or this is, in a conflict situation or a tough conversation. But this goes for even just regular communication. Hey, Christmas party is, Tuesday, December 6th, and all of a sudden it's the 4th, and I'm just now telling my team there's a problem. Right. There's a problem there that they're not going to trust me. But when they are surprised by any type of information, it is a decrease in the trust that they're going to have with you. My last comment is, and I love this quote, this is from, I think, Greg Cagle. The first time I ever heard it was, authenticity is a trust accelerator.
I'm going to talk about accountability not as a word, but as a principle. Because what I've discovered is that this is something very essential to people's life, but it's something that a lot of people don't really want. I've often said in leadership that I would never follow a leader that wasn't accountable. Somebody asked me that one time, well, why would you not follow a leader that is not accountable? And I said, it's because I don't trust them. And they kind of looked at me as a negative person, and so I kind of wanted to just kind of rattle their world a little bit, so I said, I don't trust you either. And then I said, oh, by the way, I don't trust me. You see, we're all human, and we all have times in our lives when we don't do the right thing. So why have accountability in your life is to have someone in your life that will help you do the right thing. I had an accountability partner for many years as a leader. His name was Bill, great guy. And we would meet every month. And I had him ask me the hard questions on purpose because I just wanted to make sure that I would do the right thing. And to be honest with you, to do the right thing is easier if somebody holds you accountable than if no one holds you at all accountable. And so every month we would have a lunch together. It'd be about an hour and a half. And in that lunch, he would ask me 5 questions. And in those 5 questions, I would answer them. But the last question is the question I want to just mention for a moment because it's the one that always cracked me up, and it was one that always got me. Because after he asked me the 4 questions, we kind of talked them through. His last question is, John, have you lied about any of the previous questions? And there are times I'd say, well, Bill, let's go back to number 3 for a moment. I kind of maybe colored that one just a little bit. Now, why did I ask him to ask me that question? Because I've lied before. Don't look at me like that. So have you. Accountability is for the person who really wants to get better. And here's what I've discovered. People that truly want to get better and improve, they welcome accountability. And people who don't want to get better and don't want to improve, they don't want accountability. For me, I think for you, I think it's essential. And by the way, Bill made me a lot better. I hope you find someone in your life that loves you unconditionally. You got to have that. But then you can go to, and they can help you like Bill helped me. I promise you, you're better with somebody holding you accountable than with people not holding you accountable and you're just kind of doing your own thing.
On July 4th, my father passed away. And what I'm going to do is share with you a tribute to my dad. And it's the lessons that he taught me. He lived for 98 years and 8 months. And the first one I want to start with is what I'm really known for, but it's what I learned. It's what I observed. It's who my father was. And the lesson that my dad taught me to do was just basically add value to people. Every day, my dad got up for one purpose, and that is to make a day better for someone else, to lift them, to love them, to pour into them. And every day when my dad would put his head down at the pillow at night, there would be no doubt people that would come to his mind that he knew that he had contributed in a positive way to their life. I often talk about in relationships how that we're either a plus or a minus in our relationships. In other words, I'm either adding value to you, or to be honest with you, if I'm selfish and kind of into self-centeredness, I probably wear you out and take value from you and kind of, you see me coming and think, oh my gosh, I'm feeling bad already. Well, my father was not a plus in people's lives. He was a plus in people's lives. Often when I'm in conversation with people, like at dinner, I love to ask questions. And one of the questions I love to ask is, what's the best advice that you ever received and who gave it to you? And the best advice that I ever received was when I graduated from college, and I sat down with my father and I asked him to just give me what he thought would be the best career advice. How can I just do well? And I'll never forget, he said, John, 3 things. If you'll do these 3 things, I promise you'll do well. And what he shared with me that day, I have carried with me my entire life. And every time I teach, every time I write, every time I lead, I put it through the grid that my dad gave me that day, and I have found that it is absolutely the best advice I ever received. And here's what he said. He said, John, every day, value people, believe in people, and unconditionally love people. Those 3 things. He said, John, every day value people, because most people go through life and they've not been truly valued. Because they've not been truly valued, sometimes they don't even have the value that they have for themselves that they should have. So he said, lift people by letting them see not only who they are, which is already valuing people, but who they can become. He said, believe in people. Just look at people and believe the best, think the best, receive the best. He said, always stay in the best with people. He said, we are all human. Every one of us have our worst side. Wow. I mean, let's just talk about it for a moment, that there's probably a day in your life and in my life that we hope nobody ever knows about. I mean, we don't always operate on top level, but my father taught me that the best way to get people to live the best life is to believe in him. And then thirdly, he said, and this is the clincher, he said, unconditionally love them. He said, I could almost promise you, as you speak, as you lead, as you write, I can almost promise you that the person that you are communicating with has never been unconditionally loved. I mean, just loved, period. No strings attached. But he said, if you'll unconditionally love them, they'll immediately feel it. They'll experience it. And he said, John, you will be a people magnet. People will want to be around you because no one else gives them that unconditional love feeling. Incredible advice. We've all heard this statement that people will forget what you said. They'll even maybe forget what you did. But they won't forget how you made them feel. Unconditional love makes people feel something that no other way or other person can ever be given to them. It's a fact. And so I took my dad's advice, and I just value people, believe in people, unconditionally love them. I do that for you, but I do that for everyone. And I have found that that was the greatest advice I've ever received, and hopefully it'll help you.
Welcome to the Maxwell Leadership Executive Podcast, where our goal is to help you increase your reputation as a leader, increase your ability to influence others, and increase your ability to fully engage your team to deliver remarkable results.